At the beginning of the 19th century, when industry was becoming America's religion, Brooklyn was considered the hinterland of unreachable Manhattan, and Greenpoint, in turn, the hinterland of Brooklyn. For immigrants, it was one of the key gateways to America. For some, the beginning and the end of their journey. In the second half of the 20th century, the area between Newtown Creek and the highway connecting Brooklyn with Manhattan was known as Little Poland. You could hear people speaking Polish, shopping at Polish stores, visiting Polish doctors, barbers, lawyers, and restaurants. But there was never a place like this in Poland. Watch the Greenpoint Tales.
Nazywam się Wyszogrodzki I znalazłem się w Nowym Jorku.
I found myself in New York somewhat by accident, though I was really determined to get there.
Byłem pasjonatem muzyki.
I was passionate about music, American music, American cinema, and I can honestly say that's what drove me to America.
Naczytałem się już pewnych rzeczy. Dostęp do źródeł był.
So back in the early 80s, when I was a student at the University of Warsaw, we'd actually already had access to some American music and literature. In 81, I went to America for 3 months. It was all just a series of random coincidences. I ended up going to the US by ship. Through people I met on board, I found out about this neighborhood called Greenpoint, which was supposed to be the Polish area in New York. My image of that place, based on those conversations, would crack up anyone I talked to, even today. I pictured cute little hotels with Polish-speaking staff, but nothing like that would happen there. I got there with my girlfriend at the time, traveling via Montreal to New York. We got off the bus in Manhattan late at night, and I asked the cab driver to take us to Greenpoint. He replied that there was no such place, or at least he had never heard of it. I started explaining it to him, and eventually he gave up. I had no clue what the issue was because I didn't know a thing about America or New York.
Ostatni film, jaki widziałem z Nowego Jorku, to był Taxi Driver I jeszcze mi się udało zobaczyć tą 42 taką jak z filmu.
Turned out the taxi drivers didn't like going to Brooklyn at all because it usually meant that they would have an empty ride back into the city. So there we were, two clueless kids completely unprepared for what we were about to find. Honestly, we didn't know a thing about America. I've never really gotten into serious trouble. Never got beaten up, not once. However, 3 times I had a gun pointed at me. 3 times. Twice these were angry customers, but I somehow managed to calm them down. I stayed super chill and tried to turn their anger into a joke. But there was one time I got really scared. That was when a black cop put a gun to my head. Why did he do that? Well, because I was parked in the wrong spot and didn't want to turn off the engine. I think I was in front of a deli. I just wanted to quickly grab some cigarettes on my way. I knew I can't turn off the engine because it wouldn't start again, and I'd be stuck there like an idiot parked by a fire hydrant. The cop saw the car running with me going to the store, so he approached and told me to turn it off. I tried explaining everything, but that's when the situation heated up. Turn it off now! And that's when he pulled the gun on me. So I turned it off. Eventually he wrote me a ticket. I got stuck in there and had to call my friend to tow me out. And that's nothing compared to a friend of mine who bought a Ford Mustang that only had a reverse gear. He was waiting for a new transmission, but until then he was just driving it around in reverse. I've got to confess to another failure. I went to America with my old cassette player because I couldn't imagine being in the States listening to American music but not having all my Polish music with me. I just couldn't. When I got to America, I realized that the player worked on 220 volts, but in the US they used 110. That's how little we knew about America. I eventually figured it out by buying batteries for it. I didn't have much money then. My dad gave me $100 for the whole trip, and I tried to make it work. So I went to a store in Greenpoint to buy batteries for my little boombox, the one I brought from Poland.
Wszedłem do sklepu, żeby kupić baterię do mojego radiomagnetofonu Grundig, przywiezionego z Polski. I byłem świadkiem takiej
And I witnessed this scene where a Polish couple was trying to buy a boombox too.
Radiomagnetofon, bo wtedy wszyscy to kupowali z zamiarem zabrania go do kraju.
These people were really struggling to communicate with the salesman.
Który tam pracował, to był szef tego sklepu. Więc ja jako taki uczynny
So, being a helpful young guy, I started translating for them, trying to help them out. At the end, they even asked me if it was a quality brand. I'll remember this until the day I die, that the radio was called Kasuga. I'd never heard of anything like that before. And I just said, look, it's a no-brainer. It's Kasuga. That instantly made me popular with the store owner, who offered me a job right after the couple happily left. He asked me how I make a living and where I'd worked before. I didn't have a job. I was just wandering around the neighborhood, trying not to spend the $100 I had. So I ended up staying at that store longer. In December that year, martial law was declared back in Poland, and I couldn't go back. Things got serious and I had to stay for longer in America. My reason for being there was different from most of my fellow Poles. I don't want to sound pretentious, but I went there as an optimistic, naive young guy who was in love with music, American culture, movies, and records. I was dreaming about those records. I spent almost everything I earned on them. I started going to concerts and suddenly I realized I could see all these artists live there. I was learning New York by just walking around the city, exploring the clubs, the concert halls. Discovering the city was such a thrilling experience. And I realized that if someone's really looking for something in New York, they'll find it for sure. That's what I learned there. Greenpoint felt like a small, closed-off village, mostly Polish. The Polish vibe of the neighborhood didn't really help the business I was in. Poles would come in, spend hours asking questions. But then they'd leave without buying a thing, saying they'd buy something only when they were going back to Poland. They were all stuck in a kind of limbo, with no contact with family back in Poland. When I first got back to the United States, I realized I was meeting types of Polish people I'd never known back in Poland. Before that, I hadn't really interacted with people from small towns, or rather from the countryside. I'd never had family there. I lived in the city, grew up in Warsaw, and as a kid I'd go on vacation. But I never encountered people who were so different from Americans and from the type of Poles I knew back in Poland. These people were entirely focused on one goal, saving up money. They didn't assimilate. They didn't even mingle. They were completely uninterested in American culture and the language, which they didn't know and had no ambition to learn. I talked to people who had lived in Greenpoint for many, many years, and some of them even admitted they'd never been to Manhattan. They'd even share wild stories about Manhattan, like people running around naked or shootouts on the street. They were all urban legends that had popped up in the Polish community here. There was a huge imbalance, mostly men and hardly any women. There were some women, of course, but men definitely outnumbered them. Most of them worked in construction. They'd often come into my store after work, and I got to know that community really well. It was like meeting a version of Poland that I hadn't known in Poland. We were very different from each other. Back then, calling to Poland was tough. You had to book a call, hope the operator didn't confuse Poland with Holland, and then wait by the phone for hours to get connected. But finally, after about a year of total silence, calls started to come through. During martial law, we'd sent a lot of packages to friends in Poland. I'd record music onto tapes. I was a bit of a DJ for them. I sent tons and tons of music. We'd also buy clothes, shoes, coffee, things like that, because we'd read in newspapers that these things were in short supply back home. I also had this small personal mission as a rebellious young guy wanting to fight the system, even from America. I'd cut out some interesting articles from newspapers, and we'd stuff them into shoes we sent back in packages. Our friends knew to take the newspapers out of the shoes to find the hidden information. We never got caught. After my first day in the States, I went back to Poland to finish my studies. I went back to America a second time, officially to make some money, of course, but also to escape Poland for a bit. I missed New York terribly, the concerts, the friends, the freedom, the different lifestyle there. My second stay in the United States was definitely a bit different. I ended up working at the same company because they remembered me and liked me there, so I returned to the same job. The time spent in America gave me so much, it really opened my eyes. I think it taught me tolerance. I met so many different kinds of people. Years later, while interviewing Paul Auster, we talked about New York in that sense. You either learn tolerance there, or you go crazy. There's nothing in between. New York is inherently tolerant. It accepts everyone who can communicate, no matter their accent or descent. If you could only get your message across, that was enough. It didn't matter if it wasn't grammatically perfect. I think those years in the States shaped my career. That's where I first got into musical theatre and Broadway, and later I ended up working in that field in Poland. After the years I spent there, I ended up feeling disappointed with the Polish community in America. I didn't realize how weak and unsupportive it was. I hadn't expected it to be so powerless. Poles were involved in very niche jobs. It was kind of disappointing. It wasn't a strong community. You could see how united Italians, Jews and Greeks were. That was really impressive. It really does have something to do with our national character. We're different. I think that when an Italian comes to America, even if he's just a simple guy from Sicily, he'll get a job at a fellow Italian's pizzeria. Then he might even get a loan from his community to open his own pizzeria and set himself up for the future. When Jews started coming to New York from the Soviet Union, entire communities were waiting for them. They organized their lives, got into schools, found them jobs, and so on. I knew some of those people, but no one was waiting for us, Poles.
Myśmy szli przez ten Greenpoint, szukając hotelu. To się można było w głowę po prostu puknąć, a nie szukać hotelu, którego tam nie ma do dzisiaj zresztą. Natomiast
Poles have this strange way that when someone from home comes over, even if they're family, they've got to go through some tough initiation first, like, look how hard it was for me. You need to appreciate what you have. We Poles tend to drag each other down. We don't like to help one another. Here, it's pretty rare for Poles to make it big.
Jak zmarły niedawno Jan P. Kaczmarek, którego odbierałem pierwszego dnia jego pobytu w Nowym Jorku dawno temu. no i który wrócił do Polski z Oscarem, jak wiemy.
The ones who make it in Poland are the Poles who break away from those communities. I know doctors and tech people who are doing great over there, but they don't live among Poles.
Bo ja wiem o takich lekarzach, znam też ludzi ze środowisk informatycznych, którzy tam się świetnie poustawiali. No najlepsze, co mnie spotkało w Nowym
Well,
Jorku,
the best thing that happened for me in New York was that I married my first wife there. And then I met my second one.
Drugą.